Hi everyone, welcome to another very exciting tutorial in CSS and JavaScript. Today we're going to be taking a look at how we can create some cool animations. Explicitly in this tutorial we have this button which is called floating action button, and when you click on it, it kind of transitions into a sort of toolbar on the bottom of the page. So let me show you how it looks. So when you click on it, it kind of nicely transitions into this toolbar, and then you can pretty much put anything you want on this toolbar, and when you close the button it just goes back to the original state. So for this specific example I followed a concept, something that is called material design. For those of you who don't know what exactly it is, material design is a set of instructions on how to create good user experiences and good user interfaces based on Google standard. You can pretty much see a lot of those things on Android phones. So things like, for example, how to define the duration and easing, how to kind of create movements, and also what layout to kind of follow to provide a good user experience, apart from components like buttons and cards and dialogues and lists and everything. So while I was looking at this, I got interested in the buttons with the title of floating action button, which pretty much means that the buttons that are floating kind of in the page. And then I encountered this very cool animation over here where you click on this guy and then it kind of transitions into this nice toolbar, like this one, which is kind of like a share button. And I wanted to mimic the same experience using CSS and JavaScript on a desktop computer, basically, or desktop browser. So alright, let's get started. For those of you who hasn't yet subscribed to my channel, please go ahead and do, to be able to see my next tutorials through notifications that you get. And it's kind of like a intermediate to advanced tutorial, so please bear with me as I'm going kind of thoroughly over what trick did I follow to create this kind of animation, right? So let's get started. So for the button itself, which follows the material design standards in terms of the look and also interaction, you see this very nice shadow when you go over it. I created this div with a class trigger, and then I put an eye element to represent this plus icon. I'm using this icon framework called Ionicons from Ionic Framework guys. They have pretty much very nice icons that, or web fonts or icon fonts or web icon fonts that you can use to create this. And then for the toolbar itself, I created a div with a class toolbar. Inside of it, I created another division with a button in it, which is represented by this, close text over here, which is a button. And then this is the tricky part. I created another sort of pseudo element, which from the look perspective exactly looks like this circle, and then that's what, when this moves over here, it just, I just sort of hide this one and then show the other one, which kind of expands instantly when this guy reaches that area. So as you can see, boom, there is another circle which is kind of invisible at the moment, and I will try to switch off and on the display and opacities to exactly show you what trick did I use to create this kind of nice animation. Alright, so going back to the classes, let me just switch back to the tab view so I have a better real estate over here. So for the trigger or this button, as you see, you know, width, height 56 pixels, border radius 50% to make it a circle, position absolute, and then I kind of put that in the right, since it's absolute. The right distance from the right hand side of the window is 50 pixel, and the same for the bottom as well. And then for this specific one, I positioned it fixed, right? So that it kind of, regardless of if you have a scroller or anything, kind of gets fixed in this right hand side corner of the window. And the hover, the box shadow is pretty much, I defined 2 box shadows. For those of you who doesn't know, you can actually define multiple box shadows on elements using this comma operator. So there is this very shallow box shadow which doesn't have any sort of x and y, it's just the radius of the blurriness. And then I added another one which is kind of like in the y-axis. As you can see, there's this hollow over here. And then when you hover on it, it actually, you know, I added the hover, which is, let me show you where it is. There you go. I just changed this 6 to 12. Sort of, it makes it like this button actually pops up more, right? As again, as I said, it's a material design concept which looks pretty cool to me. All right, so this is my trigger, and then let me show you how the toolbar looks. So I defined this class toolbar, as you remember, in the HTML side. So I have this toolbar over here. Let me just give it a background of, you know, maybe red, so that you see how it looks. Yes, this is my toolbar. And then inside my toolbar, as you can see, inside my toolbar, I have this close button and also this pseudo circle. And if you noticed in my CSS, this pseudo circle is actually having the same, kind of the same styles as my trigger button. So that's the tricky part, right? Let me just change the opacity to 1 so that you can see what I mean. Boom, there is this circle over here, right? So the trick is that this sort of toolbar has overflow hidden, so that anything outside of this will not get shown. That's why when I click on it, it kind of gets expanded, and then it just, because of the overflow hidden, this green area, which is defined by this green background inside my pseudo circle, it kind of gets cut because the overflow of the toolbar is hidden, as you can see. Then I obviously, in order to put it on the bottom, I positioned it absolute with bottom 0, gave it a width of 100 pixel, and then height of 70 pixel. Gave it a little bit of a padding. All right, so to go back, what I do is that I use transform and transition in the beginning to move this over here, and then when it got to this point, I start the next animation, which is kind of scaling up this circle, because this circle as well uses overflow hidden. So pretty much, if I want to show you what exactly it is, I need to remove the overflow hidden from my pseudo circle as well. So I'm going to do it over here. I'm going to just change the overflow hidden to change it to visible. So you can see actually there is this kind of div with a class green background, which is like pure background with the width, and actually with the width and height of the whole, you know, screen. You know, you don't need to really define it that big, as long as it kind of covers, you know, pretty much this area, it's okay. So going back to CSS, I'm gonna just add the overflow again. So you can see that the actual circle or pseudo circle kind of masks out this area. And then when I click on this and it moves over here, that circle scale gets bigger so that it shows more of the green background, which kind of covers this, right? So let me just show you what exactly does that mean. I'm going to change this to hidden. and then you see the effect. So what happens is that I move this over here and then scale up this circle, since it's kind of like a mask for the div that is inside it, which is this green background. When I scale it up, let me show you what exactly it means by scaling up. So let's see where it is. This is the pseudo circle. Let me just give it a transform scale, and then something like 10 maybe. You can see how it looks, and the reason why it looks like this is because the overflow property of my toolbar is hidden. So just to show you how initially it looks without the overflow hidden, let me show you. Boom, that's what it is, right? So what happens, I click on it, it goes up to here, then instantly after the animation gets here, that circle I scale up, and since the overflow of the header is of the toolbar is basically hidden, it kind of cuts off so that it only shows the area within this sort of box, right? So going back again, I'll change this to hidden. You can see it kind of just cuts out anything else but the thing that is inside it. And then I'm gonna remove this scale. Sorry, not this scale, but this scale that I added just to show you how it looks. And now I'm gonna talk a little bit about the animation itself, how I move this over here and how I transition this to a very big circle, kind of covering the whole area here, so that with the overflow hidden of my toolbar, it just shows it inside this area. So I'm gonna go back, change the toolbar to remove the background so we don't get any background, and also I'm going to change the opacity on my pseudo circle to be 0, and then yes, it looks alright. Now in terms of animation, so in order to move this over here, I'm going to show you how I did that. So I added a new class on top of the trigger, which I kind of run it using JavaScript when I click on this, and then you can see that there is this transform property, translate -50% and 40%, right? So what it basically means that go back -50% on this axis and then 40% down. So 50%, 40%. So I want this, when I click it, to end up exactly where my circle is, this hidden circle right now, that is kind of like the one that expands and fills the whole area of my toolbar, right? So it's so easy. I translated -50%, 40%, and at the end I want the opacity to become 0 because I want to hide this guy, right? Also, I would like to, when it gets moved, I want to kind of remove or change or hide this plus as well. That's where on the trigger open class, on the I element inside it, I set the opacity to 0 as well, right? So that when you click on this, what happens first, it gets translated to -50 and 40 pixel, and then also the opacity of it becomes 0, and the opacity of the icon within that also becomes 0. You can see how it looks. And now in terms of the timing, we need to use the transition property. You can see that on the transition property of my trigger, I defined a 0.15 seconds for the transform property, which is this one, right? And then 0.1 for the opacity, right? So in my transition, where I can define multiple transitions for different properties, since I have 2 property available, when I click on this, I want it to be translated to be a little bit longer, and then I also want the opacity to be a little bit less in terms of time, right? And I also give it a delay of 0.1 second, right? So basically what I mean is that after 0.1 second that gets passed in the transition, you know, run the opacity transition for 0.1, right? And that pretty much tells how this one looks. You can see that there is this cubic Bezier property, which is the transition function, which is kind of, this is something pretty hard. Where I did get this is from, the concepts in the material design, which I'm going to, but the whole idea, in order to get to this feel and look, as you can see over here, you can see when you click, this button goes kind of from the slow to fast, and then that circle that is going to mimic this guy over here goes from fast to slow. So slow to fast and then fast to slow, right? And in order to get that, I went in the motion section of the material design and took a look at the duration and easing, and just scroll down a little bit, and when I reached at around, let's say here, you can see that I have the deceleration curve and acceleration curve, right? Which is exactly what I want. So I want the acceleration curve for my trigger button to be moved over here, kind of like in an acceleration phase from slow to fast, which is exactly what I see over here. You can see it's like it's slow, but it's gonna get fast. So I kind of followed this and used this CSS property for my function, which is cubic Bezier. And then obviously for the other one, I want it from the fast to slow. So it kind of decelerate. And then I used this cubic Bezier function for the other circle, which I'm going to show you over here. So on my pseudo circle open, what I do, I define the transform scale to 45, kind of, it scales up to kind of cover the whole area. And then I define the transition delay of 0.15 seconds. And the reason why is that I don't want this transition to start before this trigger button gets to that point. And you can see that I defined the timing of that first transition 0.15 seconds. So I have to basically define a transition delay of 0.15 seconds so that I do not start the second animation before the first one gets finished, right? And then from the transition perspective, you can see that for the second animation, I gave it a 0.3 seconds for the duration, and it's obviously a transform because I'm scaling up that circle. And then I use the cubic Bezier function, which represents the deceleration, right? Because this guy comes from slow to fast. So in order to have a smooth transition, the second animation should start from fast to slow, right? And I took all those information from the motion, duration, and easing section of the material design, right? So, and also there is this opacity as well that I kind of use here, because initially, as I told you, the opacity is 0 and then it becomes 1. But I really want that duration to be fast, right? So you can see that's quite fast. If I change this to something really high, you can see that it takes some time for the opacity to kick in, and it kind of looks okay, but not really, So I just turn it back to maybe 3 seconds, 0.3 seconds, and you can see that you have this very cool kind of transitioning animation by clicking on this, showing up this toolbar. Alright, I hope you really like this tutorial. This is one of those tutorials that even for me, it takes some time to figure out how to mimic these kind of looks. These are not necessarily valid for a normal website design, but if you are designing a very cool UI with lots of animations and stuff, this could be a good sort of reference on how you can utilize a very nice transitioning UI. So I hope you liked it. If you had any questions, please go ahead and post it in the comment section. If you like this tutorial, please go ahead and like it. If you want to share it, and obviously if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe. I would like to ask all of you to kind of help me in this sort of journey that I started, so that I can create and share all of these knowledge that I had taken from the community, from here and there, so that I can share it with you guys. So happy New Year, and I hope you have a very good time. Tomorrow, I think it's the New Year's Eve, and see you next year. Bye.